Hello and welcome to an all new episode of Up the Coast right before the Thanksgiving holiday. As always, I'm your host, Tyler. At the back end of the show, I'll spend just a couple of minutes going over a super eventful weekend in ACC basketball. But we're going to dedicate the vast majority of this show, as we are now going to do every other episode, to diving into one of the more fascinating teams in the conference. And this week, that honor goes to the Charleston Invitational. I don't know what the tournament's actually called. Whatever the MTE is, the Clemson Tigers are the champions of it. And so, Grayson Mann of ClemsonTigerNet, thank you for joining me to talk about this fascinating orange team.
Yeah, fascinating. Certainly the word I would use, Tyler, and it's exciting to hop on for another season. It's great to be back.
Yeah, this was the team that, as I was going through my preseason stuff, I realized was probably the one that I skipped and shouldn't have, because this was a giant mystery box from the beginning. I personally was down on Clemson. I am not looking good for that prediction right now as they sit at number 32 in Ken Palm. But it's such a mishmash roster. And despite the fact that they now own wins over West Virginia and Georgia, I still don't really know all that much about it. So I think we got to kick things off. I got a whole host of just various questions for you to kind of help me figure out this team as much as the listeners. Number one, just being, who is Clemson's best guard? Because I still have no idea.
I mean, on paper, you look at this roster and the run one returning starter that was on this tournament team from last year that left due to injury in the ACC tournament and back in March is Dylan Hunter. And his play has continued to grow throughout this season. I know it's still early, but things have been a little rocky for him before the Charleston Classic got rolling, but he started to pick up back to form. He had double figures in both games against West Virginia and Georgia. So that would be my first answer. But Tyler, what's unique about this team and what we're going to get into is the best player per se. I'd say that they don't really have like an alpha guy right now. And that's kind of the identity that this group is starting to present is the hot hand is going to change on a consistent basis. It was Carter Welling against West Virginia in explosive second half. Justin Porter and Butta Johnson, the two transfer guards from UAB and Middle Tennessee State, picked it up in overtime in the second half against Georgia. And you just have this sum of their parts that Brownell has assembled. And it's different from years past where you rely on like a guy like PJ Hall and Ian Shefflin or a Chase Hunter to rally the troops and get things going. Now it's different this year. There isn't one guy that this bench will turn into and at an under four timeout and say, we need you to get us 10 points right now. It's a different group, and that plays to maybe some strengths and maybe some weaknesses that this group has. But I think that in this weekend tournament, we sort of saw, yeah, this group's got a lot of players, and it's going to change hands every single day.
I think you can almost sum up where Clemson is right now, that in that win over Georgia in overtime, their leading scorer, Carter Welling, did not play. And at no point watching that overtime did it strike me as like, whoa, why is Carter Welling not on the court? Like, you just completely bought it. Nick Davidson was honestly probably playing better than him in that game. I know they brought Wallen in for defense near the end, but yeah, it just didn't strike me as surprising whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a group that you have, and I asked Brownell about this because I found it fascinating that Nick Davidson played a season low against North Alabama a few nights ago in an inconsequential game in terms of the overall picture. But I just wanted to see his thoughts on your top transfer guy who you spent a lot of money on in the offseason is basically on the bench for the entirety of that second half. And he said, yeah, we're going to have nights like this where you're going to see guys who have been excellent for us, and they're just going to have to ride the bench because somebody's been better. And that's a strength that he has. He's been praising this depth for a long time, even going back to the summer where he felt like he had 10 guys that could play double figure minutes on a consistent basis. And so you have guys like Carter Welling, who arguably was one of Clemson's better players over the tournament, not play a minute in overtime. And that's fascinating for Clemson to be able to have the confidence to do that because there have been points, especially in the front court, that Clemson's depth has been their biggest weakness. When Ian Shefflin or Victor Locken's not on the floor, they got into a lot of trouble. And it doesn't seem like that's been the case so far this year for the most part.
So just taking a snapshot right here, and this would not have been true by any means 4 days ago, and very well after the Alabama and BYU games coming up in a couple of weeks, it may not be true again. I would say I'm picking RJ Godfrey as their best player at the moment. To me, he was the MVP of the weekend, which is crazy to say about a guy who scored 26 points over the duration of two games, but just the massive rebounds that he was hauling in late in that Georgia game, the defense that he played during their biggest runs in both of them, it just kind of feels like he's bringing an extra oomph that no one else on this team really has at the moment. And it's kind of amazing to think about him that way. Just somebody who was a very good bit player on the Elite Eight team 2 years ago doesn't seem to honestly be all that much more skilled than he was when he walked out the door at Clemson after that season. Somehow he seems like he's jumping higher, which maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I just don't remember. I don't get how that's possible, but he to me was the most impressive guy of the weekend. And it's probably a big stretch to bestow that type of honor on a guy who has not taken more than 8 shots in a game yet this season.
Yeah, he's been incredible so far this year, and it's fascinating to hear his story where he's a guy who transfers to Georgia and almost instantly he's like, "What did I just do? What decision did I just make? I love Clemson. Why did I go here?" And he sort of spent that year. It was sort of that thing where you're looking out the window. It's that cliche from an old romance movie or something where they're looking out, recollecting the memories, thinking back what was. And when Godfrey came back, every time I've talked to him, it's been a giant smile on his face. Just the appreciation he has for this university. And you mentioned how he's jumping a little higher. He's gotten a lot stronger. And there was an example where he had a frustration foul in one of Clemson's earlier cupcake games, and he slams the ball on the floor, and he didn't realize how strong he was in the moment because the ball flew, and it might have been able to, or like a fan to catch it. And he immediately was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Did not mean to do that." But he does know his own strength on the court. He's able to push people around in the post. And one of the defining plays of the tournament for me in the Charleston Classic is Clemson's down 8, and West Virginia was seemingly had all the momentum, and Godfrey gets a putback and one that is able to charge Clemson in that second half and ultimately carried them to a win. He's been their best player so far. And I think maybe I'd use the word most consistent. And in that way, not that others haven't, but he's been reaching double figures on a consistent basis. He's been their best rebounder and provides a toughness in the post that reminds you of a more athletic Ian Shefflin, as crazy as that is to say, just minus some of the 3-point shooting that Shefflin had on the outside. Godfrey's been a beast, and Clemson has absolutely needed him in every single way.
One of the other guys that has kind of surprised me here in the opposite way, Butta Johnson, came in as a reputation as just kind of an inconsistent heat check guy. I would have never expected that in that ginormous overtime against Georgia, he would be the guy with the blue cane assignment throughout the full 5 minutes. And I mean, just a quick aside, Blue Cane, who after seeing him against Georgia Tech and now against Clemson, he is the modern day Mac McClung to me. Just
Yeah.
this like completely unathletic looking white guy who wouldn't turn heads if he walked into LA Fitness right now, who can dunk on a college center and just really loves to chuck awful 3-point shots. And all Butta Johnson's responsibility was this guy's going to shoot. Don't let him get a clean shot. And he was excellent at that in overtime. And honestly, I think that's what kind of sunk Georgia's offense. Is Kane just took he burned a lot of time on a few possessions just dribbling around early in that OT, and he took a lot of bad threes that really kind of took them out of that game.
Yeah, there were moments where you're wondering, what the heck is he doing? Oh, with some of that shot selection. But yeah, Butta Johnson, excellent yesterday against Georgia. And he's been someone that has really been maybe siphoned out of the rotation recently. But Brownell had said on Sunday night during the press conference that he had post Bulldogs victory, and he said that he felt like this was a tournament where he'd get his groove back and that Johnson was going to get his swagger back, to quote that old meme video. And he certainly did. And over time in that second half, he was Clemson's go to guy where he was riding that hot hand. But it's been his defense that's impressed me the most, where he's a tinier guy, and so he's going to get maybe overwhelmed a bit in conference play, but he's scrappy. He's always looking for the ball. He's got a knack for it. And as you said, he had one assignment, and it was to shut down one of Georgia's better players, and he did that thoroughly well and forced some pretty bad shot selections.
So Justin Porter, who I think eventually ends up being the answer of who's the guy that we believe in the most to get Clemson a bucket. And disagree with me if you'd like. I just think when we're looking towards February, March, I think he's probably the guy who gets to have the ball in his hands in the biggest moments of this season. He's also, along with Dylan Hunter, really been the only guy that Brownell has trusted to kind of take on a big role consistently game in and game out.
Yeah, I think right now he's the answer alongside Hunter, at least at the guard spot. And he's been able to provide a steadier hand than some at that position. His 3-point shooting against Georgia felt like he couldn't miss in certain spots. But Tyler, when I tell you this, there's an aspect of this team with this roster that hasn't been really the case in years past, is that some of these freshmen are much more physically ready. And that's not really the case for a Brownell led team. He usually keeps those guys deep to the side of the bench, and they're more practice players for that first year. But when I tell you that Zach Foster is a special talent, the freshman guard out of Atlanta, Georgia, oh my gosh, Tyler, it's early, and I know it's only November 24th as we're recording this, but I think Foster's got the potential to be one of the best players to come out of this program. There is a certain juice to him, things that I heard in the summer that, yeah, sometimes he takes a 40-foot shot or a 30-foot shot because in high school, he did that all the time with ease, and Brownell sort of had to hone him in. But there's a talent that we really haven't seen at that spot with the way he moves, the way he defends. I think by March or February, I think the name Zach Foster not only is going to be a consistent name for maybe one of the rookies of the year or freshmen of the year for the ACC, I think this kid's got the goods to be a program staple. And I know it's early and I'm calling my shot, but I got a lot of people and a lot of people in that building that would agree with me on that take. He's got the goods, Tyler.
He can be a program staple as long as Radford doesn't drop him a giant bag over the offseason next year.
That's right. You got to watch out for Radford.
It is funny. I mean, I was taking a look at this team because, let's be honest, first couple of days of the season are busy. You're kind of cherry picking here and there. Clemson played some real garbage teams in their opening bye games. And so I didn't catch them at all until the Georgetown game and was digging into the stats right before that. And Foster was really just kind of a tiny smudge on the stat sheet. It was Ace Buckner who
Yeah.
looked like he had emerged as a star immediately. That train has kind of slowed down. He scored single digit points the entire Charleston tournament in both games combined. But yeah, that's a fascinating one. And Foster did not get as much run as I was kind of hoping to see from him this weekend, but he's a guy I'll have my eye on going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I had been told that Brownell had this interaction with him at a practice where he's like, "You're not in high school," and you can fill in an expletive there where Brownell usually has some pretty colorful vocabulary. But he's one that I think that his my chief concern usually is those bad possessions. Brownell's been really willing to just throw them out and be like, "Yeah, you've had your 5 minutes in the sun, but it's over. We got a pretty front-loaded team. Don't need you on the floor right now." Really, out of necessity, Foster's been on the floor more than maybe he anticipated, and so it's been good for the freshman to kind of have this trial by fire. He got the kitchen sink thrown at him against West Virginia, a really physical team that I think gave Clemson a lot of good looks. And so against Georgia, he had double figures, deep from three, able to move the ball. Sometimes it's maybe not the shot selection, but the way he's able to move and put people in the right spot is what's impressed me with the kid. It's a very cerebral freshman class that's gotten a lot done.
So, zooming out overall here, as we try to look for trends with this team and what can they sustain, what can they not, these good Brownell teams have always taken care of the ball, but they're doing so at a particularly elite level this year, which is really helping offset the fact that they're not forcing a ton of turnovers themselves, still holding on to a positive rate. Now, the big thing is a lot of these big guys just kind of never give the ball up, and Justin Porter, despite his big usage, is national top 100 in turnover rate. So, is that something that you think can sustain? Is there maybe a little bit something that you're seeing that could be problematic going forward in that department?
Yeah, I think against Clemson's, as you kind of put it, like you call them essentially bye weeks because of the competition that they're playing. And they had a night where it was like 25-2 in terms of assists to turnover. It was a ridiculous stat. And you thought to yourself, is that necessarily sustainable? And they've gotten their hand in the cookie jar a few times and been caught doing so. But overall, this team's ball movement has been one of their stronger assets. And I think that's because this is a group that doesn't have, yeah, the Justin Porter usage rate is high, but there's not a guy on this floor that can get you 20 and 10 right now every single night. It's a group that's had to rely on the collective. And with that, ball movement has to be a priority where you have to find the best shot. You have to be a selfless player on that side of the ball. So I do think it's sustainable. The one thing that I would add that gives me concern that you pointed out is they're not creating as many turnovers right now on the other side of the ball defensively. Maybe that comes more as this group gels as a defensive unit, but certainly I do think that that ball movement is sustainable, especially in the half court when they're really dialed in on finding the right shot.
So we've focused so much on the guards. Who ends up being the starting center for this team? And maybe it's multiple. I mean, the West Virginia game, they started three guys who I think probably their best position is center between Welling, Wallen, and Davidson. And Nick Davidson, especially, has just kind of been a disappointment for me personally. 8, 5, and 1.5. This was a dominant player, one of the best ball moving bigs in the country on a Nevada team 2 years ago that made the NCAA tournament, playing in a tough Mountain West. Like, this is not some crazy big leap up for him to go to Clemson. And all of a sudden in the Georgia game, he's coming off the bench for the first time.
Yeah, he really has been. And I don't know if it's just sort of been finding his place within this group. And so you had this big splash, and Clemson had to fight off schools like Texas and a few others for his services. I think West Virginia, ironically enough, was another school that wanted him to come to the Mountaineers. And so you felt like Clemson had snagged one of their top needs, which was front court pieces. And I think Carter Welling is going to end up being the better of the three between him, Wallin, and obviously you have Godfrey in that mix. I think he's going to be a consistent staple, maybe at the four. But at that five spot, I really like Welling and what he brings in terms of an ability for this team to be able to go five out because he can shoot from deep, but also he's a very big threat by the post and he's a tough rebounder. Davidson just hasn't really had that umph yet. I'm still holding out judgment yet. I don't want to make any declarations on whether he's a portal bust until maybe ACC play gets going. But as of right now, it hasn't been promising. And 8, 5, and 1, as you pointed out, to what Clemson's paying him, I don't think that's been a successful marriage so far.
Yeah, so you mentioned Godfrey. Like, I keep him out of this discussion just because I feel like he can easily play next to any of these three. And if needed, can just simply play the three next to two of them. Whereas I think when we get into these toughest ACC games, we're probably going to discover that a couple of these combinations of the Welling, Wallen, Davidson group just don't work against some of the faster teams they're going to face, like an NC State, a North Carolina. I think are just going to be too quick for a lot of those two center lineups.
Yeah, I think we'll find out this team's ceiling in ACC play, and I think BYU and Alabama will be a good preview as to how much this team can go because that's comparable talent, I think, right there between those two non-con games and the ACC, at least the top, the cream of the crop in terms of the conference with the NC States of the world that Will Wade's got a funded roster. NC and North Carolina just took down Kansas. Duke appears to have another freshman phenom. All those schools have pieces. How Clemson fights that and battles through it all is going to determine maybe where this team's potential lies. I think right now I still lean as this tournament, this group being a tournament bubble team, if not maybe sneaking in at the 11th hour. But if a couple of those wins could potentially change my mind and say this group can compete. But I think it starts with that front court spot, as you mentioned, where is that physicality there? Are those combinations going to work? We're going to find out here pretty soon.
So the remainder of this December schedule here, Alabama, BYU, we mentioned. I mean, those are two games, especially going to Tuscaloosa and then a neutral site after that, where Clemson could play very well and still lose both of them. I'm almost starting to turn a little bit of an eye towards that week right before Christmas, South Carolina at home, and one of the best defenses in the country combined with a pretty kind of bordering on inept offense in Cincinnati in a neutral site. Is that Atlanta? I'm
It's in
thinking
Greenville.
Greenville. Okay. So that's what semi-home would be for Clemson. But just looking at that stretch, those 4 in 5, as a Clemson expert speaking to people who are not, what are you looking for, whether it's for the team in general or specific players in those games, that's going to really inform how good they can be in ACC play?
Yeah, I think that that stretch against BYU and Alabama is going to be very important. And it's not because if they get a win or a loss in that case, do they belong on the same floor talent wise? Because you've had those games where Clemson's gone to Alabama and won a game there. That was an important mark for that Elite Eight team that proved that, yeah, they can compete with the big dogs. And Clemson's going to get a taste of very fair competition that are going to be playing in the NBA next year. The BYU kid and AJ Despedeza is really good. The boozer guy for Duke, Will Wade's got a ton of dudes at NC State. So I think the mark for me is, can they get out of this non-conference play 8-4, 9-3? Is that possible for this team to be able to sneak ahead? Maybe be a 10-2 squad. I don't have the necessary math right now in my head as to how many games they have left. But if that group has the ability to maybe scratch and claw their way to maybe splitting BYU and Alabama, that would be incredibly impressive, and I think would change a lot of minds nationally. I think Clemson, the beat right now, and that kind of inner circle still views this group as a bubble team that they've got potential, but we need to see more. And I think nationally, that's sort of the case as well. I think that barometer for how we'll measure their success in conference play is that four-game combination that you mentioned of Cincinnati, Carolina, BYU, and Alabama. How they fare in that, I'll be a little bit more of a harsher critic on South Carolina and Cincinnati because I don't think they compare to the Bamas and the BYUs of the world. I want Clemson to compete, and that's sort of my barometer for success against Bama and BYU. Cincy and South Carolina, I think they should win them both.
So it is they're projected to be favored in 15 straight games per Ken Palm. When you talk about coming after that BYU game and then up before Duke. Now, granted, the very end of Clemson's ACC schedule is brutal, and we're talking about bubble chances, maybe not the best, but racking up wins. The stupid ACC scheduling system got them a second game against Pitt instead of playing Virginia this year. So that's going to make things a lot easier. And then, of course, the Georgia Tech rivalry. And this is maybe the easiest schedule in the ACC just because they get two of what might be bottom four teams at the moment. So that certainly helps out. But just to close things out, let's flip ahead this like late February stretch where Clemson goes at Duke, at Wake Forest, home Florida State and Louisville, at North Carolina. Like, if they're just good going into that, if they can hang around on the bubble, that's a make or break stretch because you pick up one big win there, it might get you in the tournament. This also could be the teams that just end the season in disgrace. So let's say it's February 18th in Wake Forest, tie game, 2 minutes left. Who do you think are the five that Brad Brownell is going to want to have out on the floor at that moment?
That's a good question, Tyler. I think right now, if I had to guess, I'm going to close my eyes and picture it. We're at Winston-Salem, and it's 2 minutes. You said 2 minutes and tied. Who's my starting five?
Yeah, so
I
no
would
like
go,
offense defense cuteness here. Like just your five best guys for the next couple of possessions.
I would throw out Carter Welling at my center spot. I would put Dylan Hunter, Zach Foster, RJ Godfrey, and then I go Jake Walleen because I think you get that combination of length. And Walleen's a good 3-point shooter. He has been at the very least this year. And so I think that starting five might be your closeout squad. Hunter kind of settles the offense down. He's the captain of the ship. Zach Foster, as I said earlier in this program, he's a special talent, and I think it'll be tough to keep him off the floor. He's got some things he'll be able to work out in the next several months as well. And then I like the Godfrey Walleen Carter Welling combo as your front court forward center package to be able to finish out games. I think that provides you enough on both sides to get it done.
So first off, the Zach Foster thing, that we might have to replay this clip come February to see if you were either extremely wrong or the only one who is dead right. You own, what are we thinking, a mansion on Zach Foster Island, it sounds like.
I got others who are with me, man. So we're riding the Zach Foster propaganda machine has gone on full swing. Like we're flying first class in this one.
Yeah, I mean, we will see on that one. Dylan Hunter, we haven't really talked about because he's basically just last year's Dylan Hunter, but like 10% better, which I don't, to me, is personally completely unsurprising. Um, Jake Walling, before we wrap up, because we really just did not talk about him. He was someone who got a tad bit of discussion in the offseason. All the talk was about Welling and Davidson above him. He seemed like he would just be, if I had to guess, I would have thought he was going to be a bench guy. Him and Hunter are the only two who've started all 7 games. What's the biggest reason why he would be one of those key guys come the end of the year?
Steady Eddie. And I agree with you. I thought he would be someone that would siphon into the bench, excuse me, eventually for somebody else. And for him, his 3-point shooting has been a lot better. I think he was a 32% career percentage shooter from outside heading into his Clemson debut, and he's been a lot better from that spot. And also, he just is one of those players that Brownell likes to keep out there because he's not doing anything entirely wrong. He's just sort of your steady forward that plays solid defense, takes the right shots. And so when I look at sort of the lineup as a collective, he's also not a liability defensively. And so you're just kind of trust him to go out there and make the right plays, not necessarily go out there and get you 12 a night, but someone who could and is very capable of that. But at the same time, if you want to close out with a good starting five, you need someone in there that's going to take care of the basketball and make the right plays. And Wallin's very capable of doing that.
Yeah, and he was someone who actually had a fairly decent block rate at Utah last year. Nothing special, but that's something that maybe could kick up. Gives you that stretch, 38% from deep. And yeah, he has been a little bit of a surprise so far. But Grayson, man, we will see. This Clemson team is really fascinating. The Charleston Classic champions. I can't believe I forgot that. God knows I was watching both halves of that bracket. Thanks, Boston College, throughout the weekend. But Clemson wins their first MTE in multiple decades, according to the announcers. Grayson, man, you will be following the entire rest of the season. Where can the good people find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at gray_man21, but more importantly, check us out at tigernet.com or our YouTube page, Clemson TigerNet, for just a podcast. We host the Orange Crush podcast twice a week, and we'll be getting into basketball season here pretty soon with Clemson's football season ending with a clash in Columbia, and then we'll have a break before bowl season. So we'll be full swing for basketball and a lot more. And Tyler, I appreciate you having me on for another season. I'm hopefully getting another invite pretty soon in the winter.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone go follow Grayson if you're looking for 6-6 bowl team coverage or 7-5. I don't know where Clemson football's at. But especially if you need a brochure about condo properties on Zach Foster Island, he is the man to go to. Grayson, thank you for joining me.
Tyler, I appreciate you, man.
So, as I mentioned at the top, going to close this episode out just running through a couple of the very important games from the weekend. Now, before we get into that, if you are not already, be sure that you are checking out Busting Brackets. Every Friday or Saturday morning, I will be doing a weekly update on the goings on in the ACC along with the Atlantic 10. Just a trio of my thoughts for the week, along with a recap of the game of the week, the stat line of the week, and looking ahead to the biggest game that weekend and the Sickos game for the next week. And if you were reading last week, you would have known that my Sickos game of the week was Quinnipiac going out to Pitt. The Bobcats ended up pulling the upset of the epitome of brutality there. We will talk about that game at the end of this segment when we get into some of the negatives for the conference. But I do want to just quickly touch on one game that was covered by the time I put that column out. And it's just because of how important it could be in the grand scheme of this season. Not only now, but even starting to get into March and maybe April. And that is Duke holding off a shorthanded Kansas team. They did not have their star in Darren Peterson. It was a game that, quite frankly, had Duke lost, would have been a significant disappointment and an upset. But you're still playing Kansas. It's Bill Self and a bunch of high major talents, and it's not going to be easy. Duke kind of steamrolled them in the first half. Kansas found a way to start chipping away. They got the lead as low as 5 a couple of times. The very first one, their big charge came. They get it down to 5, 12:30 to go, and Caden Boozer, the twin, the lesser heralded of the brothers, the backup point guard, hits back-to-back giant shots on consecutive possessions to extend the Duke lead. And in that moment, it kind of felt like Kansas really took a hard gut punch, that just didn't have the same heart and push anymore. And this is significant because once again, through 2 weeks into the season, or I guess three now, just like last year, Caleb Foster simply does not appear to be what you need offensively from a point guard of a team that has legitimate national title aspirations. If you're trying to make the second round of the tournament, it certainly can suffice. And his defense has been extremely good this year. He is not going to fall out of the rotation like last season. But sometimes the other team is making a run, and you need that guy to just calm you down and make a play on his own. Last year, by January, once Cooper Flagg had really grown into his own, and Sion James got to take over that big point guard role, you had two guys who could do it. By March, you had three because Tyrese Proctor was capable of it as well. And God, even by the end of the ACC tournament, you could potentially put Concanipple on that list. I think Cam Boozer gets there eventually. He is not yet. He still has ways to grow just as an attacker on his own. But it may end up just being the Boozer brothers. And Caden really felt like he had his breakout moment in that game. And I wonder how much longer it goes until he potentially takes over a bigger role. He was someone I was unsure about going into the year. I would now be very surprised if he is not their point guard come the biggest games of the season. But overall, this was the time last year where we began to have the discussions of, well, I guess Pitt's the second best team in the ACC because they're the only ones who look competitive besides Duke. I mean, this was after they lost the Greenbrier to Wisconsin. Coming runner up in that tournament was basically what qualified you for being the second best in a conference that at the time genuinely looked like it had two NCAA tournament caliber teams. Things have flipped so significantly this year, and it's far more good to talk about with the ACC than bad. So some of the other top performers over the weekend, how about Virginia, who split games in Greenbrier like Pitt did last year, but a thrilling win over Northwestern in the first one. Tista Ritter, the 22-year-old junior, even though he's in his first year of collegiate eligibility, that is a discussion for a different day. But he drops a career high 26 points in only 27 minutes because he was in foul trouble the whole game. Really had his big starring moment. But the MVP of the weekend for Virginia, just another guy to add to this group of ACC star true freshmen that is starting to approach 20 at this point. Chance Mallory, the guard off the bench for the Cavaliers, who has really just grown into simply being their guy. And you saw it in the Butler game where Dallin Hall only played 15 minutes. Mallory still came off the bench, but despite the fact that he was not shooting well in that game, he really kind of just seized that key creator role for the Cavaliers. He actually led them in minutes in that loss. And just throughout the weekend, over and over and over again, everything Virginia tried to do offensively went through DeRitter, through the fifth-year guard Malik Thomas, who was a star in the WCC last year, or it went through Mallory. And that's where this Virginia team has really started to shift. And even though Jakari White has been a significant piece of the offense, he's not creating anything for himself. He is benefiting from what those three guys can do. And Chance Mallory is someone that, just like Caden Boozer, I would be very surprised if he is not starting here pretty soon for Virginia. Another just significant breakout player in this league. Another team that split the weekend, Wake Forest, who hung extremely tough with Texas Tech. And through three notable games for Wake, they have really brought the drama. They have a 1 point loss, another 1 point loss, and a 1 point win against Memphis. And if you have not seen the ending of the Memphis game, you need to make sure that you go on to at Up the Coast Pod on Twitter, retweeted that from Friday night. We often know which coaches are better tacticians than others, but we rarely get to see in the moment which coach is better. You don't get to have like a defining play. Well, if there was ever any question that Steve Forbes is a better coach during those 40 minutes than Penny Hardaway, it got addressed that night in that weird ballroom in Baha Mar, Bahamas. The night before, Wake Forest is down by 4 with less than 2 seconds to go. And so they decide to crack open a play that they had clearly run and practiced dozens of times. A full court heave to Trayvon Spillers right inside the 3 point arc. You get your best box out guy to create position. He taps it out to a shooter who then, more often than not, if the play is executed properly, is going to get a wide open three. It's something that you run at the end of that game to see if it works against real competition and then file it away because you hope that if you get another moment, it may come in January, February, March, and the other team may have just missed it on the film study. They may have forgotten that it existed. Instead, the opportunity came about 26 hours later, and Memphis clearly was not prepared film wise. As the announcers are just saying over and over again, as Wake Forest comes out of the timeout with 2 seconds to go, down by two, saying, "Hey, Wake ran this play yesterday. They ran it extremely well. They're probably going to try it again." Memphis was not prepared for that. The pass to Trayvon Spillage was perfect. By the way, quick aside, like you're really giving it away when you bring in Isaac Carr, the freshman, to play 4 total seconds in the weekend. Those seconds being both of those long passes. But Carr to Spillers, perfect execution, tip to a wide open Juke Harris. 6 feet away from the nearest defender. He hits it. Wake Forest gets a significant win over Memphis in that one. And this was the preseason number 12 in the ACC. Teams at that level were just not winning games like this last season. The other one is Louisville, who we all knew were awesome before this, but they go on the road to face what very well could end up being the best defense in the country in Cincinnati when the year is all said and done. And the Bearcats really hit them hard to start the game. I think Louisville had 6 points at the 10-minute mark. It was an astounding run of offensive ineptitude for Louisville, forced by this Bearcats defense. But as has happened in every big moment this year, Ryan Conwell and Mikael Brown Jr. exploded in the second half. And it's really just becoming clear that those two guys are just not going to be stoppable on a nightly basis. And even if you can come up with a brilliant game plan for one of them, there's probably no way to take out both. Now, on the flip side, the race to the bottom in the ACC, there's maybe 4 teams involved. 2 of them I'm going to leave aside for the moment. They haven't had that horrible enough week for me to really expose them like that. But Boston College is just running away with it right now. A loss in Charleston in the other bracket where they couldn't crack 50 against Davidson, and then an embarrassing overtime against Tulane, where the Eagles really proved that in a mid-major league they would be a great 500 team, that they would easily just go 9-9 in the American this year. But they play in an improved ACC, and they've really just kind of scurried to the bottom. I mean, Donald Hand's not even having the awesome year that we were all expecting. Bowden Kapke, great breakout. Congratulations to you. You deserve a shout out. But this team, like the offense just looks so clunky. It's kind of my turn, your turn, my turn. The ball's just getting moved when guys run out of places to go and they look lost. The other team that is mounting a charge towards potentially missing Charlotte is Pitt now, who got blown out by West Virginia. They were getting blown out by Central Florida early in the second half, managed to keep that game respectable. But where the pain really kicks in, an epitome of brutality at home at the hands of Quinnipiac, a game that Pitt led for exactly 0 seconds in the second half. Amari Monroe, who many people thought was going to go to Pitt, drops 25 points on 9 of 13 shooting on the Panthers. And look, Pitt has gotten pretty good production from their young guys between Cialepa and Witherspoon and Indricitis. Normally, they're going to get an awesome game out of one of them, a mediocre game out of one, and a crappy freshman game out of the other, which is probably enough from those guys. It's been those veteran guards, Barry Dunning just being a no-show to start the season. DeMarco Minor seemed like he was going to be their best player, putting up just 10.5 points, 3.5 assists a game. This team just really needs more from that spot, and especially if Brandon Cummings is going to be out longer. The most steady guy has been noted low major killer Cam Corrin. We'll see if that holds up in ACC play. I think we all reserve the right to say no until he proves it elsewise. But yeah, Pitt, it is amazing where they were at last year. 12 months later, things have really aggressively. We will see. We will see where this goes. It's going to be a fascinating feast week. NC State really kind of leading the headlines in Maui. Syracuse and Notre Dame also with big games Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Those three will kind of dominate the early part of the week. Virginia Tech plays a very good Colorado State team on Wednesday. They'll kind of dominate the end of the week. And then those huge Thanksgiving Day games, Miami against BYU, Duke against Arkansas, North Carolina against Michigan State. And by the time you hear this show again, it will be after the ACC SEC Challenge. I said it with Tate Frazier back in September. That's where we're really going to learn. This league needs to go 6-8 or better. Or, sorry, it's 16 teams in it. So, yeah, I guess they got to go 7-9 or better to prove that this really is a worthy power conference league worth competing with the SEC in the Big Ten at the top because they were not last year. But we will see. I will be back recapping those games Thursday or Friday of that week, so watch out for that. Everyone have a happy Thanksgiving. A big thank you to Grayson Mann for joining me. Big thank you to all of you for listening. Please spread the word. I'm extremely thankful for the time that you have given this show in its first year plus on this week of reflection. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you enjoy the holiday, and hopefully you are back next week.